He survived the sudden death of his first wife. He rebuilt a life for his 2 children. He trusted again. Loved again. And then, he was found bludgeoned to death in his own bedroom. The people claiming self-defense? His new wife and her father. But behind their story lies something far more twisted: lies, manipulation, custody battles, and a desperate fight for the truth. This isn't just a murder story. It's a case where justice was delayed, and maybe denied. You're watching True Crimes Now, where we dive into the darkest corners of real-life cases and uncover what others won't say. Subscribe now, and hit the bell, so you never miss the stories that demand to be told. It was just after 3 a.m. in Lexington, North Carolina, when the calm broke. The voice on the 911 call was almost too steady. A man said he'd just killed his son-in-law. Said he'd stepped in to protect his daughter. Said it was self-defense. When police arrived at the house on Panther Creek Court, they found a man's body on the bedroom floor. His head was crushed. Blood covered the walls. The carpet was soaked through. And the man responsible was standing right there. His name was Jason Corbett. He was from Ireland. A husband. A father of 2. And now, he was dead, killed inside his own home. The ones who said they tried to stop him were his wife, Molly Martins, and her father, Thomas. What they told police sounded like a domestic disturbance gone too far. But the crime scene? It told a different story. One far more brutal. One that felt planned. Staged, even. But to understand what really happened in that house that night, you have to go back. Because this story didn't start with a 911 call, it started nearly a decade earlier, across the ocean. Jason Corbett was a widower. His first wife, Mags, died unexpectedly in 2006 from a severe asthma attack. They had 2 young kids, Jack and Sarah. Jason was left heartbroken and overwhelmed, trying to raise them on his own in Limerick, Ireland. In 2008, needing help with the kids, Jason hired an American au pair. Her name was Molly Martins. She was 31, from Tennessee, and came into their lives at just the right time, or at least that's how it seemed. At first, everything looked like it was falling into place. Jason was still grieving, but Molly helped bring structure back to the house. She bonded with the children. She was kind, warm, and eventually, something more developed between them. By 2011, Jason made a huge decision. He packed up his life in Ireland and moved to North Carolina with Molly and the kids. A fresh start. He bought them a house, nearly $400,000, and gave Molly $80,000 to decorate it. He even bought her a luxury SUV. Not long after that, they got married. But behind the smiles and family photos, things weren't so perfect. Jason's family back home were supportive at first. Molly seemed like she was stepping into the role of mother with genuine care. But it didn't take long for concerns to grow. Molly told stories that didn't quite add up. She claimed she'd been an Olympic swimmer. That she was a certified Montessori teacher. That she had fostered a young boy. But no one could verify any of it. Then it got weirder. She told neighbors that Jason's daughter, Sarah, was her own biological child. She even went into detail about her labor story during a Bible study group. But Sarah had been born years before Molly ever entered Jason's life. And she didn't stop there. Jason's sister, Tracy, later discovered Molly had told her own friends that she and Jason's late wife, Mags, had been pen pals before Mags passed away. That they'd been close. The truth? They'd never even met. Tracy also learned that just before Molly traveled to Ireland in 2008, she had been released from a psychiatric facility in Georgia. Something she never told Jason, at least not until weeks before the wedding. Over time, the stories got darker. Molly allegedly told the children that their mother hadn't died from an asthma attack, but that Jason had killed her. That he was dangerous. That she was the only one who could protect them now. Sarah, just a child, would later confirm that Molly said these things. Jack, the older child, was punished for calling her by her name instead of Mom. One time, she allegedly held his face under a kitchen faucet as punishment for splashing water. And when he told neighbors that Molly wasn't his real mother, she exploded. Friends of the family started noticing strange behavior. One recalled how Molly flew into a rage during their wedding dinner, after a guest brought McDonald's for a boy who couldn't eat the catered food. Another remembered how Jason once left a party early after Molly humiliated him about his weight in front of others. Jason had become quiet, withdrawn. He was no longer the energetic, light-hearted man his family knew. He looked tired, worn down. And then, just days before he died, he made a decision. He told a friend he was leaving Molly. He wanted to go back to Ireland, with his children. Alone. But he never got the chance. At 3:02 a.m., Thomas Martins called 911. He told the dispatcher he'd killed his son-in-law during an argument. Claimed Jason was choking Molly. Claimed he grabbed a baseball bat and hit him to save her. But when first responders arrived, the scene didn't look like self-defense. Jason's injuries were catastrophic. His skull was crushed. He'd been hit multiple times. And not just with a bat, a heavy paving brick was also found at the scene. And while Jason's body lay in a pool of blood, both Molly and her father were calm. Too calm. They gave statements that seemed practiced, rehearsed. Then, something strange happened. Just hours after being questioned and released, Molly allegedly paid thousands to have the entire house professionally cleaned, top to bottom. Every trace of blood scrubbed away. Jason's family hadn't even arrived in the country yet. When they did, Molly tried to block them from seeing Jason's remains. She insisted that he be cremated immediately. And she only allowed access to the body after his family agreed, in writing, to pay all the funeral costs and the expenses to bring him back home to Ireland. None of it sat right. As investigators began to dig deeper, more and more cracks started to show. Custody battles. Legal documents. Secrets buried just beneath the surface. What unfolded over the next year would leave two countries in shock. And the biggest question remained. Was Jason Corbett really the abuser? Or had he walked straight into a trap, and never realized it until it was too late? The autopsy results would send shockwaves. Jason Corbett's skull had been fractured multiple times. Not just a single blow in the heat of the moment. No. It was relentless. Overkill. Blunt force trauma to the head, repeated again and again. And yet, Molly and her father stuck to their story. They said Jason was violent. That he flew into a rage. That Molly feared for her life. That Thomas, visiting for the weekend, just happened to be there and had no choice but to defend his daughter. But the forensics painted a very different picture. The injuries weren't consistent with self-defense. There were no defensive wounds on Molly. No bruises around her neck where she claimed Jason had choked her. No signs of a struggle that would have explained the level of force used. Jason had been caught off guard. In the positioning of his body, it told a silent truth. He was on the ground, in a corner of the bedroom. One arm raised in a final, useless attempt to shield himself. The attack hadn't stopped when he fell. It had continued long after he was already down. The paving brick, used alongside the baseball bat, was caked with blood and hair. This wasn't protection. It was annihilation. Investigators started piecing together more of what had happened in the days leading up to Jason's death. They found out about Molly's increasing desperation, how Jason had been pulling away. Quietly making arrangements to return to Ireland. Finalizing paperwork. Planning his exit. And Molly knew it. She'd already spoken to lawyers. Already researched custody laws. She wanted Jason's children, badly. Maybe even more than she wanted Jason himself. In private, she'd told people she wanted to adopt them. Give them her last name. Secure their U.S. citizenship. But Jason resisted. He wouldn't let it happen. he was adamant his children would stay Irish. His children would never be taken from him. And maybe that was the moment something inside her broke. The night Jason was killed, the children were inside the house. Jack and Sarah, just 10 and 8 years old, were sleeping down the hall. Or at least, they were supposed to be. Later testimony revealed they may have seen more than anyone realized. In the days after their father's death, Molly moved fast. Too fast. She didn't just clean the house, she began pushing for cremation before an autopsy could even be completed. When Jason's family arrived from Ireland, she gave them legal documents to sign, making them financially responsible for everything, in exchange for access to the body. But Jason's sister, Tracy Lynch, wasn't someone who could be pushed around. She and her husband, David, had flown across the world for answers. And what they found horrified them. Jason's blood was still drying on the walls, and Molly was already speaking about his death in the past tense, casually. Emotionless. When Tracy started asking questions, the walls began to crumble. Molly's carefully crafted version of events didn't line up. And her behavior, especially around the children, raised more red flags. Jack had grown distant. Withdrawn. Sarah seemed confused, guarded. It was clear that something had shifted. Deeply. Tracy and David decided they couldn't leave them behind. They petitioned for custody, and that battle would soon explode into the public eye. What followed was a 2-year legal war between the Corbett family and the Martins clan. On one side, Jason's relatives, determined to protect his children. On the other, Molly and her father, insisting they had done nothing wrong, that they were the victims. But there was one problem for Molly. The children were beginning to talk. Sarah, the youngest, told the court chilling things. That Molly had told her lies about her mother. That she claimed Jason had killed her. That she wasn't safe with her father. That if he ever took her away, something terrible would happen. And Jack, older, more aware, had his own memories. He remembered the punishments. The manipulation. The way Molly tried to erase their mother's memory and replace it with her own twisted version. He remembered being forced to call her mom. And how upset she'd get if he didn't. Slowly, the truth began bleeding out. And when the case went to trial in 2017, the world finally heard what the Corbett family had feared all along. The murder wasn't spontaneous. It wasn't about protecting anyone. It was about control. The prosecution laid out their timeline. Jason wanted to leave. Molly knew it. And she wasn't going to let him take the children with him. So on August 2, 2015, in the dead of night, she and her father staged a confrontation. But something went wrong. Maybe Jason fought back. Maybe he didn't get the chance. But the end result was the same. He was dead, beaten until unrecognizable. And the people responsible were the ones claiming to be victims. The jury didn't buy it. Molly Martins and her father, Thomas, were found guilty of second-degree murder. They were both sentenced to 20 to 25 years in prison. For a moment, it felt like justice had been served. But this story wasn't finished. Years later, in 2020, the North Carolina Court of Appeals overturned the convictions, citing that certain pieces of evidence had been excluded during the original trial, evidence that may have supported the self-defense claim. The case was thrown back into limbo. Jason's family, after years of pain, loss, and legal battles, were once again facing the possibility that Molly and her father could walk free. The retrial dragged on. Delays. Motions. Hearings. Until finally, in 2023, a plea deal was offered. Voluntary manslaughter. Time served. Molly Martins and her father accepted the deal. And in 2024, just under a decade after Jason's murder, they were released from prison. No apologies. No admissions of guilt. Just silence. But the scars left behind didn't disappear. Jack and Sarah, older now, had their childhood shattered. A father stolen. A mother's memory twisted. and years spent in legal and emotional warfare. Tracy Lynch would later say the worst part wasn't just losing Jason. It was watching the system bend in ways no one expected. Watching the truth become diluted. Watching the people responsible walk free. And the question that still lingers, long after the headlines faded, is chilling. If justice can be this fragile, what's to stop it from breaking again? After nearly a decade of grief, courtroom battles, and shattered lives, the Corbett family was left with nothing more than the bitter taste of unfinished justice. Jason was dead. Buried in the country he once hoped to return to, far from the North Carolina house where his story ended in blood. Molly Martins and her father, Thomas, walked free in 2024. No prison uniforms. No shackles. Just a deal quietly made behind closed doors. A deal that bypassed a jury. Bypassed the evidence. Bypassed the truth. And when they stepped outside the courthouse that day, the cameras were waiting, but Molly said nothing. She didn't speak about the night Jason died. She didn't speak about the children she tried to claim. She didn't speak about the man who gave her everything, his love, his trust, his home, and who died clutching his own bloodied face. Silence. As if that could rewrite the story. But Jason's family, especially his sister Tracy, refused to let the silence win. She had become more than a grieving sibling. She became a force. A voice for Jason when he could no longer speak. And for Jack and Sarah, she became their anchor. After years of turmoil, they were finally safe. Tracy and her husband David had adopted them. Raised them. Gave them a new life in Ireland, far from the darkness that haunted those early years. But even oceans away, the echoes still followed. Jack, who once watched his father's murder unfold from behind a bedroom door, now carried that night like a scar beneath his skin. And Sarah, who once called Molly Mom, had to unlearn the lies whispered to her in the dark. The trauma didn't disappear. It simply adapted. For them, the horror wasn't just in what happened. It was in how the world responded. The people who didn't believe. The delays. The backpedaling. The legal loopholes that turned their father's death into a chess game. And for viewers watching this story unfold, there's a question you can't shake. What if Jason had left 1 week earlier? What if the children had screamed louder? What if the system had worked the first time? Because the truth is, Jason did everything he could. He stayed quiet for the sake of peace. He gave Molly the benefit of the doubt. He trusted her enough to bring her into his home, let her raise his children. And she destroyed him for it. There were signs, yes. The lies, the manipulation, the need for control. The possessiveness. The quiet warnings whispered by concerned friends and family. But nothing concrete. Nothing actionable. Until it was too late. Jason's death wasn't just a crime. It was a tragedy built over years, layer by layer, until it collapsed under its own weight. And what makes it worse is this. It didn't have to end this way. He wanted to leave. He had the plane tickets. He had the paperwork. He even told a friend he just needed to survive the next few weeks. But he didn't. Because on August 2nd, 2015, Molly and her father made sure he never left. What happened that night, what was said, how the first blow landed, how long it lasted, may never be fully known. The only witnesses were the killers, and they never told the full truth. But the aftermath tells us enough. Jason's blood wasn't just on the walls. It was on the justice system that failed to hold his killers fully accountable. It was on the quiet acceptance of a plea deal that minimized a brutal, premeditated killing. And for so many watching, it was a chilling reminder. Monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they smile, say they love you, and tuck your children in at night. Molly Martins smiled a lot. She told people she wanted to be a mother. Told them she was a victim. Told them Jason was dangerous. But in the end, it was her lies that proved deadly. And Thomas Martins, a former FBI agent, used his status, his reputation, to defend the indefensible. He once claimed he did what any father would do. But how many fathers bring a baseball bat to a family bedroom in the middle of the night? How many swing until the skull caves in? The years have passed, but Jason's story still echoes, through courtrooms, news headlines, and the voices of those who won't forget. People still ask, why didn't he leave sooner? Why didn't he tell someone? But maybe the real question is, why did no one stop her? Why did no one see the truth hiding behind her smile? And perhaps, most haunting of all, how many other stories end the same way? Behind closed doors. In silence. With the world none the wiser. Jason Corbett loved deeply. He gave second chances. He built a life after unthinkable loss. But in the end, it was trust that killed him. And now, as the Martins walk free, as Jack and Sarah rebuild far from where it all began, we're left staring at a justice system that sometimes just isn't. This wasn't just a murder. It was a betrayal wrapped in familiarity. A life stolen by the very people who claim to love him most. And even now, the story doesn't feel over. Because when killers walk free, and the truth gets buried, and silence becomes protection, the question still lingers. Who really gets justice? And who gets away with murder? If you want more stories like this, real cases, real people, and the dark truths buried beneath the headlines, subscribe to True Crimes Now. We dig deeper, we ask the hard questions, and we bring you the cases that stay with you long after the screen fades to black. If you found this video compelling, share it. Someone out there may need to hear it. And let us know in the comments, do you think justice was served in this case? Thanks for watching. Stay safe. Stay aware.